Hello. Hi, can you hear me? All right, can you hear me?
I think so.
I hear you.
Perfect. Now, how do I make this big so I don't have to look at myself? There we go.
Hi, thanks for your patience.
Oh gosh, no worries. It's a
Yeah, it's
beautiful
nice.
day and I'm without children. So,
Well, there you go. It's so
yeah,
nice
it's a
to
win.
connect. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
I appreciate it. I'm excited to have you on and get to know you and hopefully tell the
And
listeners
for
a
me to
little bit about
someday,
your story
send you what you asked me to send you.
when you have a moment.
Yeah, I'm pretty good for stuff like that.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, I in the original email, I sent you a little bit about what this podcast is about, and I came across you on Twitter, and I thought you would be an amazing person to have on. Um, I like to try to keep it conversational and casual, and you know,
yeah,
I started this podcast and just with the idea that women who are in traditionally male dominated fields or different areas like that have a lot of common experiences, you know, and of course your life has taken a number of different turns as well,
yes,
as far as your path to get to where you are now. So
just a few.
yeah, just a few, and I think that, I think the listeners will really like that, and I always like to think of it as, if we were to meet each other at a cocktail party or in a, you know, in a coffee place, and we sat down and go, "Oh, you know, we do different things, but we have a lot of things in common," and so
Yeah,
that's what I hope for the podcast to kind of feel like when you listen to
very
it.
cool.
So
Very cool.
so I'll, you know, I have some info from your webpage, and then when you can send
Yeah,
me your official bio, I'll pull off of that, and then I'll do
yeah,
an intro of you, and then we'll kind of start off today where at the end of that intro.
yeah,
I like to ask folks about just what their childhood was like and what brought them to their respective fields,
yeah.
and what kind of barriers they met, which I know just from reading a little bit about your story, you know, a little bit about that, but I would love to have you talk about it.
Yeah.
And tell me what, just so I know where we are now, tell me what you are doing at this time.
So a couple of things. I'm still
Hmm.
a professional speaker, so
Hmm.
I work as a professional speaker in mental health.
Hmm.
I also run an organization that implements mental health strategies for rural communities.
Hmm.
I also work as a full-time firefighter,
Hmm.
um, and pretty much anything else anybody else asks me to do. But that's most of my time right there.
Yeah,
Um,
wonderful. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
And let's see. I know it's different in Canada than it is in US as far as participation levels in hockey, for example.
yeah.
Um, in were there as many women interested and involved in hockey as there were the guys, or was it still is it still a minority even with the increased popularity of hockey in Canada?
In the beginning, I mean, I grew up in a very small town. So I grew up
Yeah.
in a town that was like population 6,000, rural community in Ontario. Um, we had one stoplight that turned to a flashing yellow light at night because it didn't need to do anything else. So when I grew up, actually, there wasn't women's hockey in my area.
Oh, okay,
So,
okay.
which
So
I guess
definitely, yeah.
ages me a bit. But I grew up playing with boys. I played guys hockey right through till midget AAA, which I'm sure translates
I love
to
I love that midget triple.
under I know so bad under I don't even know what it would be like
Okay,
late teens.
okay, cool.
And then I transitioned to women's hockey, but
Okay,
now it's comparable. Now it's on
yeah,
par. Now
great,
women's hockey is huge in
cool.
Canada, and and
and beyond.
right into
Yeah.
the small towns. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I would love to we'll talk about that in the podcast as
Hmm.
well, because I would love to
Yeah.
just kind of talk about the trailblazing even as a youngster. So
Yeah, certainly.
okay. All right. So we'll pause for a second. We'll maybe go for about 30 minutes. Are you okay on
Yeah.
time?
Oh
And
yeah.
then at the very end, I always like to wrap up by asking you for somebody who um, maybe wants to follow in your footsteps, or we can talk
Yeah.
about in the context of somebody who wants to do what you want to do or wants to do what you do but also have struggled with mental illness. I want to make sure we
Yeah.
highlight that,
Yeah.
what your advice is, and then at the very end we'll just say, well, where can the listeners find you if they want to keep up with you?
But first, before that, before you
Yeah.
start, how incredible is it in the US right now?
Oh my gosh. We had a lot of
Because, like,
champagne
I mean,
yesterday.
we're partying in Canada, so I can only
I know.
imagine what it's like down there right now.
I mean,
Oh,
fireworks in the UK, it's just
oh,
it's a pretty amazing feeling, just I mean, it's obviously for everybody in the world, but like here it's
yeah,
just been this crazy year. It's been a crazy 4 years,
yeah,
and we're a lot of tears yesterday, a lot of
yeah,
champagne, and I have an 8-year-old son, and I made sure he watched the live address last night and
yeah,
told him why it was so important. So
yeah, good. I have a
yeah.
4-year-old who woke up saying the good guy won, the good guy won.
Oh,
Like,
I know.
that's
Oh,
how bad this is. Our 4-year-old knows the difference
yeah.
between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Just
Yeah.
and I mean, it's been
It's
so bizarre to watch from outside, and I have a
I
lot of friends in the US,
yeah.
specifically New York and LA,
The whole
and
world is watching and
it
just like jaw on the ground.
it's tough. Like,
Yeah,
it's tough, and now it's terrifying because
it
there's
is.
just so much
Yeah.
healing that needs to
Yeah.
take place now. But
And
yeah,
my
thankfully.
German au pair who lives with us, I'm always like, so what do you think? What do you make of all
Yeah,
this? What is
yeah,
your family saying back home? Because the rest of the world has got to be like, what is going on in the US, and we're
eh,
here in the thick of it, and we're just like, I can't believe uh,
yeah.
the things that I see and the things that have been happening. It's
Like, I stopped
unbelievable.
traveling. I stopped travel I would say the majority of my friends stopped
Yeah.
traveling to the US because we
Yeah.
didn't want to be there. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm married to a woman, so it's
Mhm.
like, it got to a point I was just like, "It's not even worth it.
Yeah.
It's not
You don't
worth
feel
what we might
safe.
experience
Yeah.
being there."
Yeah. Yeah.
And what a like, I mean, of all of the no travel places I would have thought I would have faced in my lifetime, whoever would have thought it would have been the US.
Yeah.
Like,
I know, right? Yeah,
just
absolutely.
terrifying. Anyway, very,
Absolutely.
very happy for you all.
Thank you.
I've been celebrating all my US friends keep sending me the videos from their, like, respective balconies and stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
It's amazing.
it's
It's
oh, it's
amazing to
just
watch. Long road ahead,
what."
but amazing to feel this way for once.
And you know what?
So,
It's weird. I was trying to do the whole, like, glass half full perspective on it all, and, maybe he served a purpose because that divide has existed in the US, and
yeah. And
maybe
yeah,
it took him putting it on display for everybody to really realize
it's been
how.
undercover.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
used to be polite, right? And
Yeah.
instead of
Mhm.
grabbing your megaphone and shouting, you would just
Yeah.
cross the street.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and now maybe now we're going to see those people who just cross the street and we can call them out.
For their true
And
colors.
yeah,
Absolutely.
like, it's just, but wow. Anyways,
Yeah.
had to ask because
Yeah. Well, thank
if you had
you.
said that you were really sad, I was hanging
I
up.
I feel like all of my guests, and it's not a political show at all, but I think the undertones of what I stand for and what we talk about on the show, it's there. It's there.
It stopped being political and it started being about humanity. Like,
Yes.
the bottom line at this
Yeah.
point, I mean, that I grew up, my mother's a politician in Canada. So, I mean, I
Mhm.
grew up with somebody who would have been the equivalent of your state level politics as a
Yeah.
mother.
Yeah.
And, this vote had nothing to do with with politics. It had to do with humanity.
Yeah, and
And it
human
was,
decency.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it got to be so shocking to look at it from the outside and think that there was even a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Anyway,
Thank you for
so,
that.
yeah. Oh,
All right, so we'll pause for a second and
yeah,
I'll just say hello and then we'll kind of jump right in. We'll start with kind of going way back. So,
absolutely.
all right. Well, hello, Kendra. I'm so excited to have you on for a number of reasons, and I cannot wait to dive into your story and your pearls. And there's just so much for all of our listeners to learn from you. So, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So you wear a number of hats. You
Yes.
have been a hockey player, you are a professional speaker, you are a mental health advocate, you are a full-time firefighter, and this has all got to start someplace interesting. And I would love to hear about what your childhood was like and what was your upbringing like and how did that play a role in shaping you into who you are?
Um, it's weird because I kind of see my childhood in two different lights now. I mean, I remember it very fondly. I grew up in a very small kind of lakeside community in Canada, and it's very picturesque. It's where you would want your cottage to be. I grew up on a beautiful beach. I have, my parents. I have an older brother. I had great friends growing up. I grew up playing sports, aging myself a bit, but grew up playing men's sports because at the time women's sports hadn't really made it to rural Ontario, and it was fantastic. And I guess when I look back at my childhood, I don't. It was great. And then I guess further down the road in my story, when I learned more about myself, I look back at it now and I see some things that might have came with implications that there were maybe some struggles happening I wasn't even aware of at the time. But from just kind of that memory perspective, it was great. I was very fortunate and very lucky.
So I read something about you where you said you were 4 and you told your mom, I don't want to figure skate anymore. I would
Hmm.
rather do what?
Well, actually, if I recall correctly, the quote was, when I grew up to be a boy, I want to
Ah,
play
okay.
hockey. Because at that time, it didn't even occur to me that that was a place for girls. I had never seen girls playing hockey in Kincardine. I grew up at the rink watching my brother play and watching the guys that I knew play and the guys I was growing up with play. And I was 4 years old and I was standing there. And there's a picture actually of the day I was in this very similarly colored snowsuit to the t-shirt I'm wearing right now, and looking over the rink, and I just turned around and said, I don't want to figure skate anymore. When I grow up to be a boy, I want to play hockey too.
And so you started playing hockey shortly after that?
I did. I mean, at that age, it's kind of, it's not very organized yet. So it was kind of, I continued to learn how to skate through figure skating, which was great. And by the next year, I was giving hockey a try, and much to, I'm sure, many people in my life's dismay, the next year I became a goalie. So I kind of immersed myself pretty quickly, and it became a huge part of my life from the time I was 6 years old on.
So you said that to your mom, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious what she said back to you. How did she respond to that?
My mom was, a great athlete in her own right. She was a tennis player. She's a badminton player. She was a squash player. She played basketball. So I mean, I don't know that, my I don't know that my words would have been that shocking. I'm sure the misunderstanding was comical at the time, but it wouldn't have been taken as anything other than just a 4-year-old making a cute statement. Um, but certainly, I've always had both my parents' support in sport, and it was kind of, I was raised in a house where it was, you can try it if you like it, if you enjoy it, if you're having fun, then stick with it, and if it's not for you, then that's fair. You'll kind of follow out your commitment for the year, and then if that's not for you anymore, then that's also fine.
In talking to many of the women on this podcast, I have had an overwhelming number state that what shaped them and kind of what kept them going and what didn't kind of tamp down their motivation a lot of times as a young child was their parents. When they said, "Hey, I want to do
Hmm.
this," the parents say, "Sure, go ahead." Not and you
Yeah,
know, and these weren't the moms and the dads who said, "Well, you know, girls don't really
yeah,
do that." And so,
yeah,
I mean, it just kind of you're a parent, I'm a parent. It just shows you how important our words are, even when kids are littles 4, 3, right?
yeah. Oh, certainly. And I mean, again, I was very lucky. My parents were those people that it wasn't, here are these barriers. It was, um, okay, let's find a way to make it work. And they came along for the journey, and it was, years and years of playing boys sports as the only girl. So it was, changing in janitors closets and in bathrooms and in first aid rooms where there were no facilities for girls to participate, and doing everything they could to really make it possible for me.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful. You know, your journey in hockey, clearly you were both gifted and hardworking, and you got to the point where you were offered a spot on Team Canada Hockey, but
Hmm.
you were simultaneously going through the process of identifying and reckoning with mental illness. I would love to hear your your story and your path kind of going through that and
Hmm.
processing that.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I guess this is obviously what I was alluding to when I said I look back now, and maybe there were things that should have stood out differently to
Mhm.
me. I was very immersed in sports growing up. It wasn't just hockey; it was tennis, it was baseball, it was any sport they would, anything they put in front of me. I think we all have things in life that we're naturally drawn to, and for me, fortunately, I'm athletically inclined, and always enjoyed myself, and did fairly well. Um, and so yeah, my path in hockey, it kind of took me right through guys hockey to a level that most women have never made it in men's hockey. And knowing kind of when I started to learn more about women's hockey, it wasn't until I was a teenager, because there was no women's hockey in my area. We had one team, and it was literally myself and a couple of girls that played in towns within 2 hours of me on their boys teams. And we kind of put together this makeshift team, and started doing some tournaments, and that's where I started to learn more about women's hockey, and ultimately decided I wanted to play for Team Canada. I wanted that jersey. I wanted my name on the back of it. And then the Olympics became a possibility, and it was, that's where I'm going to go. That's what's going to happen. Um, and I, kind of parallel to that journey, started going through some things in my personal life. My mother's a past MPP. So I guess since you're in the US, that would be the equivalent of your state politics, your state representatives. And it's politics are fairly divisive. And we lived in a riding where a lot of people were affected by the government my mom was a part of. um, and neither here nor there whether or not I agree with it, but a lot of people started treating me differently, and a lot of issues came up in a small town where everybody knew I was my mother's daughter. And so I ended up actually having to move to Toronto, for my graduating year of high school. And I just kind of went through a lot of transition and change in that time, which for my hockey, it was a blessing because it gave me the opportunity to immerse myself in women's hockey. And um, that was when I became a carded member of Team Canada's hockey program. So that was great. But on the flip side, now I'm away from my friends. I'm in an all girls private school, in Toronto, as opposed to my one horse town, small town, I know everybody kind of high school, trying to graduate and sort out life. And I everything kind of started to feel off. And after I graduated from high school, unfortunately, I got into a car accident and
Mm.
I fractured a vertebrae in my back. And I think it was the first time in my life that I was kind of laid up for a period of time. I had to kind of recover from that and heal from that, go through therapy. And at that moment, that's really symptomatically when stuff started to kind of really show itself to me. And I got to a point where it was, I was feeling symptoms of, a perceived heart attack or a stroke, or I
Mhm.
can't breathe, I'm going to faint, my heart's coming out of my chest, and started making all the trips to the emergency room. And then it started, getting into my head more, and my stomach was always upset. And I just got to a point where I was barely functioning. And I had no clue why. The doctors did what doctors did, and sent me to other doctors, and
Mhm.
I ended up with a specialist for everything. And everybody just kept telling me how healthy I was, which was great,
Yeah.
except for wasn't how I felt. And unfortunately, it kind of came to a head in a perfect storm. I had flown out to Calgary for Team Canada tryouts, and that was in '99. And I was at tryouts, and at this point, I was barely getting through my days, and
Mhm.
I spent a day trying to hide everything that had been kind of building up and happening, and realized I wasn't going to be able to hide it in that environment. Um, and I met with my coaches the next morning, and I explained to them, I've got a cardiologist, a neurologist, a gastrointestinal specialist. They're all telling me I'm fine, but something's going on here, and I don't know what it is. And they asked if it would help. I need to know I'd made Team Canada. They asked if it would help. I need to know they'd already selected me. They wanted me to play, and it didn't matter at that point. I couldn't get through my days anymore, and that was the morning I quit Team Canada. And
Wow.
I got on a plane and came home, and within the month, I was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder, severe panic disorder coupled with severe panic attacks, agoraphobia, OCD, and clinical depression. Um, I'm a high achiever, so I wanted to try them all out. And that just kind of became my next path in life. My next journey was I spent the next 5 years of my life unable to leave my apartment. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't be alone. Literally, I had two friends who just took turns spending 24/7 with me.
Wow.
Um, I couldn't function, and after the end of that 5 years, I didn't see a point anymore. And that was the realization I came to, was there was no point. That wasn't living. That wasn't a life I wanted. And I realized it
Right.
was either give up or figure out what I was living with. And it's a tough journey. I mean, very similarly to the US, there's no national mental health strategy that is easy to understand and accessible and clear cut, and the journey's so different for everybody as well. I mean, beyond medication and beyond talk therapy, there's so many resources that you have to learn how to advocate for yourself, and that's very difficult to do when you're at rock bottom.
Yeah.
And so yeah, after 5 years, I don't know how I made the decision I did, but I decided to find out what I was dealing with, and spent the next 5 years becoming somewhat of an expert in living with mental illness. And
Mhm.
it definitely changed every path in my life.
And obviously there's the work that one has to do to be able to figure out how to help themselves, right? And
Hmm.
how to be
Hmm.
well, how to live with the disease, how to manage the disease, right? When
Yeah.
did you make that pivot into speaking about it to help others? Because obviously you're doing a
Yeah.
lot as an advocate and as a speaker now. When did you make that shift?
I would say about 10 years after I was diagnosed. So I
Mhm.
spent that first 5 years. I was unknowingly a horrible patient. I was seeing my psychologist and I was taking my medication. And as we understand illness, for those of us who haven't gone to med school, you know, doctor tells you take this and go do this, and you assume that's going to result in some form of resolve in what you're dealing
Yeah.
with. And unfortunately, there's this additional burden that comes with mental illness, which is so very rarely is that going to be enough. So very rarely is that going to be what's going to turn everything around. And what I had to learn really was, after that 5 years, and I'd been on medication for 5 years, and I'd been seeing my psychologist, albeit I wasn't participating very well. But I showed up because that's what was expected of me. And it took that kind of initial step back into either I'm giving up or we're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And then we started playing with my meds, and I learned that really brutal fact that is, there's no medication that works the same way for everybody. You really
Mm-hmm.
have to work to find what works for you. And so I started down that path. And once I found that medication, I never found a medication that cured me or made it all go away, but I found something that killed the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first opportunity I had to have rational thought, I think, in it again, where I could start to actually learn, the impact of physical health, the impact of
Mm-hmm.
nutrition, the impact of getting enough sleep, the impact of mindfulness, and learning how to control how my body's responding to stress, and really learning how much of an impact that has on our mental health. And it became kind of this really intricate design of a routine that ultimately got me to a place where I felt great again. I'm somebody who doesn't regret that this happened to me. It's given me kind of an entirely new existence because, like I said earlier, now knowing what I know about disordered behavior and disordered thought, you could have diagnosed me when I was 5. I mean, I
Yeah.
had irrational fear. The anxiety was there. The panic was there. But until I'd had that car accident, just because my lifestyle was so active and family oriented, and I had the supports, and I had, we sat down to meals 3 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
I slept, I had a bedtime, um, I was physically active all the time. I was outside a lot. I was doing all of the things unbeknownst to me that support good mental health. So I was
Mm-hmm.
managing. I wasn't thriving, but I was managing, and I wasn't feeling kind of how sick I really was underlying. And it wasn't until I kind of got literally put on my back, and all of a sudden I'm not physically active. I'm somewhat on my own as a teenager in Toronto, where my habits aren't great anymore. I'm not, eating as healthy as I should be. I'm not practicing good habits. I'm not getting enough sleep. And all of a sudden it was just kind of this implosion. Um, and so I spent really that next 5 years kind of really mastering my routine. And I, I was I was not somebody who willingly was like, yeah, I want to go become a professional speaker. Nobody with anxiety and agoraphobia and OCD and panic thinks, hey, put me in a room full of strangers, because
Yeah.
it's not a good idea. Um, I was ashamed. I was ashamed of my diagnosis. For 10 years, I think the word I used to describe myself most for 10 years was pathetic, because that's how mental illness made me feel. I went from making Team Canada to I'd follow my friends down the hall if they had to go pee, because I was scared of being alone in that room for that long. I was so convinced that I'd be dead before they got back, that I couldn't be alone to that extreme. Um, and I didn't want to try to explain that. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't want to try to explain it to somebody else. Uh, and unfortunately, it took the suicide of a 14-year-old girl, and me being made aware of it, for me to realize, I was part of the problem. I'm part of
Mm-hmm.
the reason that kids and adults and so many people, that are living with mental illness, don't realize there's hope, and don't realize there's help out there.
Right.
And that realization kind of drove me back into my psychologist's office, and I asked how I could help. And she asked if I could share my story, and I'll be honest, the answer was a hard no. um, like I
Yeah.
said, that's not a dream job for somebody with my diagnosis. But uh, I very quickly realized there wasn't going to be a room that could make me feel as helpless and as hopeless as I did 10 years before that.
How
And
did you take that leap to saying, "Okay, I'm
I
going to talk about myself. I'm gonna talk about this."
yeah. So I'm a pretty big fan of accountability and allowing other people to kind of put you in a position where that expectation exists beyond something more than just me thinking it. And so
Mhm.
by going to my psychologist, I had this conversation and she said, I'm going to put this out to my colleagues. And I'm like, okay, you do it. Cause once you've done it, I can't take it back. Um, and so she did. And right away there was one of the chief psychologists for one of the largest school boards in Canada got a hold of me and asked if I would do a talk at one of their, it was kind of a mental health stigma event. And so I agreed, against my every desire. And it was bizarre, I guess it could have gone any way, and I was anxious, and it was tough. It was tough to get through. Um, but I remember at the very end of it, there was a girl who came up to me and she was crying and she just looked at me and said, I want to say thank you. And I asked her why. I asked her why she was thanking me. I mean, I get the pleasantry and the being polite, but you're in tears. Why are you thanking me right now? Um, and she said, because today I'm going to go home and I'm going to apologize to my sister. I spent the last 6 years thinking she was just looking for attention. I had no idea this was real. And
Wow.
today I'm going to go home and I'm going to make sure she knows she's never going to live another day alone with us. And
Wow.
I just remember thinking in that moment, that's bigger than my discomfort. That's bigger than me being uncomfortable with the fact that I might have a panic attack in front of a room full of strangers. And I always joke, there's a lot of people out there who are better visual learners anyway. So worst case scenario, they're going to learn differently when I'm having an absolute meltdown in front of them. But it's never happened. It's never been something that I haven't been able to get through. And at this point, there have been thousands, and it's something that every time I get anxious, every time I get nervous, every time I get up there, it's that you know really quick reminder that I live with anxiety.
Mhm.
And then it's this really cool experience where I realize that, yeah, I do, and I'm good, and I got this, and I'm okay. And even if I'm not okay in that moment, I'm in a room full of people where for me to stand up and say, you know what, guys, I'm not okay right now. Give me a sec. That's okay too. And that in itself is something we need to learn.
I think that obviously you doing the work and the speaking and the reaching out about the stigma of mental illness, and that we need to learn to accept it, and that there is
Mhm.
help, and that there are people who care. Obviously you're doing a great service to individuals out there who may also have mental illness and either may not know it or may not be willing to even seek help because of that stigma. But do you
Yeah.
feel like you having taken this leap in doing something intensely uncomfortable for you is
Mhm.
sort of part of your healing too, ongoing?
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. It's like free therapy, right? It's like free group therapy every time I do it. Um, which is a warped perspective, I'm sure, but it's cathartic. It's got such a value to me, and it's weird because this whole COVID experience has really emphasized that for me, because I have found myself struggling because I'm not out having those conversations as much, and those events aren't happening, and there's not these groups of people that I'm immersing myself in and sharing this journey with. And it's kind of been um reaffirming almost in so many ways that it's really something that's important to me, and not selfishly, but certainly there's a component of it that is self-fulfilling, to be
Mhm.
able to get out there and be okay with other people. And I'm so huge on connection. I'm so huge on, you don't have to be a doctor or a psychiatrist to affect change in somebody, to be a support. There's so much to be said for just really filling that space and letting somebody know they're not alone.
No
And
doubt.
yeah, and it's just this kind of relief when you're in that environment and when you can see those people. And anytime I'm up there sharing my story, there's no secret the people that are crawling out of their skin, like they're looking at me and I'm like, you're having a panic attack right now because I'm
Yeah.
explaining this, and you understand. And it's
Yeah.
kind of that moment of, don't worry, like we got this.
Yeah.
We got this. And those experiences and that kind of constant reminder that nobody is alone with this. I mean, this is not a unique story. This is something so many people are living with, especially now. I mean, we were in the midst of a mental health pandemic before the pandemic started, and now we
Right.
are in just phenomenal crisis.
Yeah.
Um, and really, it's been tough, kind of learning how to connect differently. And I mean, I used to be huge on, try to keep it offline, try to keep it personal, try to connect that way. And now I'm just like, thank God we have this ability. Thank God we have, Zoom and these tools available to us where we can still stay connected in ways that are safe and supportive.
Absolutely. You're also a mom, right? To a
I
4-year
am.
old?
I am. Yes. And
And
and a 1.5-year-old.
okay. And
Yeah.
how did your experiences and how did your retrospective look back at your own childhood shape yourself as a parent? And how maybe has it changed the way
Yeah.
that you parent and the way that you look at parenting?
So, I mean, first off, I'm very fortunate. Somebody else did most of the hard work. So my wife actually carried both of our boys, and at the risk of creating that moment that this causes, but in full discretion, or sorry, full honesty, we actually had three. We lost one between our boys at
Oh,
7 months, and
I'm so sorry.
yeah, it all shapes it differently, right? It's
Yeah.
this, you start with our 4-year-old now, and you try to do all of the things right. And I think we all parent from what we know. And
Mhm.
my wife and I are polar opposites. She did not grow up in a sporting environment. She's a city kid. She, is a foodie, and she is very good with kids, has a lot of experience with the children, was a teacher. Um, Whereas I came from a place where I was never around kids, and small town and sports and training, and that's how I understand life. So it's been this kind of weird compromise of how we approach it. And at the same time, there's always kind of been the umbrella of mental health. My wife has her own struggles, and lives with bipolar disorder, and so I cover the other part of the spectrum, which in itself is a calamity and worth a reality show, I'm sure. Um, but then when you put that into the perspective of parenting, I think we all kind of pick and choose our battles as parents. And so
Mhm.
for us, it became very focused on mental health. Our 4-year old's never watched a TV show in his life. He gets zero screen time. Everything is very based on, what do we know that can developmentally harm somebody's mental health, and what do we know that promotes good mental health, and talking about emotions and emphasizing it's okay to not be okay, and
Mhm.
having those hard talks, and really allowing him to experience that and be a part of that. And I think that that's kind of where our focus went in a hurry, um, obviously with all of the normal childhood things mixed in. And unfortunately, then when we lost our son River, he was just about two, Finley, our oldest, and he understood a lot of it. He understood it in ways that are shocking
Mm.
and consuming, and you don't know what to expect. And I know that, we kind of took that approach as parents of, how do we deal with this? Is this something that we just, he's two, he's not going to remember that there was this other baby.
Mhm.
Is that the route we take, or do we take the route of, honest, like, what do we do? How do we do this? So we sought kind of guidance on that. And we were told, be honest, use age
Yeah.
appropriate language, but allow him to express it, allow him to experience it, allow him to grieve. And it's just been astounding. I mean, it's kind of today I've been to the cemetery today because today he woke up and said, I need to see River. And
Yeah.
it's this like kind of horrible moment of your 4-year-old's not supposed to make you have to deal with that on days you don't want to face it. But then
Yeah.
there's the honesty of it and there's the reality of it, which is good. I want him to have that communication. I want him to know it's okay to have that communication. And he'll catch us off guard often. I mean, and it's wonderful. It's incredible. It's amazing to have that openness. But and then I'm a bit tougher. We'll be playing baseball or something, and he starts swinging the bat up and hitting the ball up, and I'm like, no, buddy, you got to swing through the ball. He goes, but Mama, if I swing up, River can play with us because the ball will go to heaven. And
Oh,
I'm like, okay, how
oh
about
my
you swing up for the
gosh.
rest of your life? Because I think that's awesome. And
Wow.
so it's kind of that a lot of parenting now for me, the focus is really just that honesty and allowing them to experience things the way they need to. And now there's a younger one, Bodhi, who, it's a lot. Boys are a lot. Learning that in a hurry and learning there's going to be a lot I still have to learn. But I think really just kind of we do the best we can. You really form your parenting beliefs with the best information you can take in from the millions of people who want to tell you you're doing it wrong. Um, and you do your best to realize that nobody really ever gives parenting advice maliciously. They're trying to do it from a place of love. And you take what works for your family, you politely thank them for their advice and disregard what doesn't work for your family, and really just kind of put it from there. But certainly I think my experience and my wife's experience has definitely shaped how we approach that, and we're certainly never going to have those boys who think they have to man up.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you're
Yeah.
doing it right. You're doing it right for
Well,
your family.
I certainly don't believe it some days, but
We're all
I don't
there
think.
sometimes.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think there's a parent out there that hasn't finished a day locked in their bathroom in tears, just thinking, "Wow, a
Yeah,
4-year-old just got the best of me."
absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, I would love to see if you would share with the audience your pearl, your number one tip for somebody who either has been in your shoes or maybe wants to be in your shoes now with all the things that you have done, overcoming fears, speaking, you're a firefighter,
yeah.
you're still an athlete. Tell me what that top tip is.
Don't allow fear to make those decisions for you. I mean, I think it's almost become a bit of a game for me. I mean, I got to a point where anything I fear, it's kind of that's what I have to take on next. I'm a big fan of exposure therapy. I think there's a lot to be said for it. Uh, and I think ultimately part of how I got into firefighting as well, it was kind of like, everybody looks at me and says, so you live with anxiety and panic and depression and you're going to be a firefighter. And to me, it was kind of like, heck yes, I am. I am. There's nothing there that I can't take on. There's nothing I can't face. And, people ask me kind of when I got into that role, how are you going to deal with it? The horrible parts of the job. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to deal with those calls and those moments that are just, people would perceive them as being too much for a normal person, let alone somebody who lives with mental illness. And I challenge that, I've spent the last 20 years mastering my mental health. And that gives me an edge. That gives me the ability to know how to process things. And it gives me the opportunity to, really understand that you can't bury that stuff. You can't just, put it somewhere and expect it's going to go away. You have to face it head on and you have to really work to stay healthy. And so I think that it's kind of that realization of fear is healthy, but fear is also something that can take control and take over if you allow it to. I experienced it in hockey. I experienced it as a goalie. I experienced it with my illness, and I've experienced it in firefighting. And quite frankly, you know, at, at any point we can sit down and say I can't do it. Um, but certainly those are the moments that you need to get up and fight the hardest. And when you do, ultimately, there is just such an incredible world on the other side of that to discover.
And I think that speaks so loudly to the idea that it's not that you need to be fearless, right? Because the fear will
Hmm.
always be there. You
No,
got to be able to recognize it and then
no,
just know what
yeah,
to do with it.
exactly. And I
That's
think it's not even about controlling it. I mean, I'm always going to have a disordered response. That's the basis and the foundation of my illness. Um, but it's being able to recognize that and place it and understand it. We are so quick to do the what we can do and what we can't do. And quite frankly, we create our own limitations. And I think that when we accept that there are ways to work through everything and not to do it alone. I mean, there's no part of life that we have to do as this kind of solo warrior. We pave the path for each other and we help each other through these moments, and everybody's always going to have information that you can learn from. And quite frankly, I mean, if you believe you're the smartest person in the room, leave that room because it's not a good room for you. I would much rather be somebody who always knows that there is somebody smarter than me in the room, and just take the time to really listen and kind of allow that to guide me.
absolutely. And I think just like they say, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a
Oh,
village to keep us well as
yeah,
individuals.
absolutely. To do anything in life, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
for
I don't
sure.
think that and that's not a negative. I think that human connection is by far one of the, most underrated things we have in the world today. We think we're so connected. We think we are so connected because we have access to information, but what we fail to realize is access to information isn't connection. It's chaos. and
Right.
and quite frankly, we don't have the ability as individuals to disseminate all of that information and process it in any way that is healthy. And quite frankly, I'd rather walk down the street with somebody holding my hand than try to take on the world alone just to prove something.
Well, I know that our listeners have learned so much from you today, and I think just like me in listening to you today, you really kind of took me on that journey with you, and I really appreciate that. I know that our listeners would love to keep up with what you are doing and learn more about you. Where can they find you online?
That's a very good question. So I am on all of the typical platforms. I'm on Facebook. Just look up Kendra Fisher. I have two pages there, a personal one and a speaking one. If you actually, the easiest way I think would probably be go to www.mentallyfit.com. And I imagine you could also find my Instagram and Twitter through that site.
Awesome. Thank you so much for spending today with me, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's great. My pleasure.
I anticipate this season, which will be season 3, coming out probably. I'm shooting for mid-January, but it may. And I have a couple more to interviews to get done for
Yeah,
this season, so it may look a little bit more like February. We'll see,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I will keep you posted. I'll send you a
Awesome.
couple of the social share images, and when you have a
Perfect.
moment, send me your
Yeah, I will. I
your
will.
info and
I
your
will.
your headshots that you want me to use. We'll create a couple. I don't know if you've seen on my site or on my Instagram. I have these little, I'll do a quote from the episode and the title of the episode and kind of have a couple different versions with your picture
Okay.
on it. And so
Awesome.
I'll share
Awesome.
those. You can share
Follow me on
those.
Instagram so that I can follow you back
I will do.
and
Yeah.
do that.
Mine
Okay?
is underscore Nancy MD on Instagram, and
Okay,
I'll
that'll be
find you on
easy. Hang on.
Instagram as well.
Underscore Nancy.
Nancy MD.
There you go. There we go.
Great. All right.
Perfect.
Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of the Sunday. It looks like you've got a little sunshine where you are, and so do we, which is
Yeah.
rare. So, yeah,
Oh, it's
have
like
a
20 degrees here right now. I don't even know what to do with it. Oh, I don't even know what that is for you guys. I hope you know the conversion because I don't.
I'll have to ask
I think it's
Siri.
like I think it's like I think it's times 2 plus 15. So
Yeah, yeah.
40 is 50.
My
Yeah,
German
I
au
don't know.
pair is always talking in Celsius, and I'm like, wait,
Yeah. What?
and centimeters, and
Yeah. Like the
I
rest of the
know.
world that isn't in
Like
the
the rest
US.
of the world, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys just do everything you can to like be standalone.
Right, I know. Well, it was really,
That's
really a
awesome.
pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you again,
Oh,
and
same.
I'll
Thanks for
stay in
having me.
touch and keep you posted.
Perfect. You take care.
All right, bye bye.
Okay. Bye.